described as an innovative approach that takes into account individual differences in people's genes, environments, and lifestyles. Not only is VA uniquely designed to pursue this cutting-edge research, its patient population would benefit most from its development. According to VA's National Center for Veterans Analysis and Statistics, veterans of color are predicted to increase from 23.2% to 32.8% by 2037, while women veterans continue to be the fastest growing population of veterans and are projected to be the only group of veterans that will continue to grow through 2037. The manner in which veterans receive health care should reflect their increasing diversity. In the past, VA conducted studies using only white men, and some methods of treatment were approved based on these heavily skewed trials. This was not unique to VA. The medical research field as a whole has operated in this manner. However, what is unique to VA is its ability and willingness to regain its position as the nation's best research institution, a research institution that attracts the nation's most talented physicians and investigators and delivers the most progressive and effective treatments available. In an effort to facilitate this transformation, VA launched the Million Veteran Program in 2011 to pursue its goal of collecting genetic material from 1 million veterans. Currently, with 750,000 veterans enrolled, it is the largest collection of its kind. Because of this rich database of information and VA's access to millions of veterans' health records, VA is becoming an increasingly attractive option as private industry determines where to focus its research dollars. VA has limited resources, a stagnant budget, and the administration has sought to slowly gut the National Institutes of Health, which is one of VA's biggest interagency partners. That is why it is increasingly important that VA's Office of Research and Development remain a competitive contender for private funds. It must also retain access to the technology and research infrastructure that private research partners can provide. This is not to say that VA's research department, under the guidance of Dr. Ramani, has not thrived. The work of VA employees to facilitate partnerships with private foundations, such as the Cohen Veterans Bioscience and other government agencies like the Department of Energy, to fill gaps in resources, should be commended. Today's hearing should serve as an opportunity for the agency to tout those achievements, but also for the members of this subcommittee to learn more information on ways in which Congress may assist. Not only will VA's increasingly diverse patient population benefit from advances in precision medicine, but some aspects of precision medicine could transform the way in which VA treats those veterans suffering from what have traditionally been thought of as invisible wounds. Advancements in the understanding and discovery of biomarkers leads many to believe that the trauma leading to a TBI or PTSD can affect a person's genetic sequencing in a way that could assist physicians as they diagnose veteran patients. Additionally, Dr. Haas has suggested that there may be hundreds of types of PTSD. If these variations can be identified, then veterans could receive effective treatment on the first try as opposed to the trial and error treatments the VA is currently forced to offer. And as chair of the Women's Veterans Task Force, I'm eager for VA investigators to identify diagnostic biomarkers for TBIs. Traumatic brain injuries are disproportionately misdiagnosed in women veterans as depression, thus denying much-needed treatment to this growing population. Due to the incredible impact precision medicine could have on veterans' health care, I am thankful for each of our witnesses' willingness to join us in today's discussion. I'm hopeful that at the end of this hearing, we can better understand exactly what barriers VA's Office of Research is up against as it continues to modernize its processes and pursue increasingly important partnerships. I'll now yield 5 minutes to Ranking Member Dunn for his opening comments.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Brownlee. A little over a year ago, I chaired my first VA research meeting, and at that meeting, 3 basic concerns were raised about the VA's research program. The first concern was that the VA research was not sufficiently focused on veteran-specific conditions and concerns. The second was that the VA medical facilities weren't complying with the VA's policy by administering grants from outside entities, as Chairwoman Brownlee mentioned, through VA nonprofit research and education corporations to the extent that is possible. And the third concern was that the VA is not efficiently translating bench discoveries to bedside in order to advance the treatment of veterans. There have been a number of changes made to the VA's research program since that hearing, and perhaps the single most significant change is the appointment of Dr. Carolyn Clancy as the Deputy Undersecretary for Discovery, Education, and affiliate networks with the oversight responsibility to the Office of Research and Development. Dr. Clancy will be testifying for the VA today and was recently named one of modern healthcare's 50 most influential clinical executives, an honor recognizing leaders who work in the healthcare industry is deemed by their peers and an expert panel to be one of the most influential leaders in research today. So congratulations to you for that, Dr. Clancy. I do wish to point out that our 3 primary concerns still have to be met, so we'll address those. Another one of our witnesses this afternoon is Mr. Matt Koontz, the Executive Director of the National Alliance on Mental Illness from Montana. Mr. Kuntz's written statement powerfully lays out the very real stakes for this issue, which is veterans' lives. Research is an important tool at the VA's disposal to improve and save lives for veterans and for all Americans. And it's incumbent on us to make sure that the VA is using that tool to its highest potential. During this afternoon's hearing, we will discuss several recommendations for how we can do that. And with our collective work, I'm confident that the VA's best breakthroughs are still ahead, and that those breakthroughs will be able to make a difference in the quality and longevity of veterans' lives and all Americans. And at that point, I now yield back. Chairwoman Brownlee.
Thank you, Dr. Dunn. On today's panel, we have Dr. Carolyn Clancy, Deputy Undersecretary for Health for Discovery, Education, and Affiliated Networks at the Department of Veteran Affairs. Dr. Clancy is accompanied by VA's Chief Research and Development Officer, Dr. Rachel Romani, and the Director of the Million Veteran Program, Dr. Samitra Muralidhar. Dr. Magli Haas will offer testimony on behalf of the Coalition to Heal Invisible Wounds, and also Mr. Matt Koontz joins us today on behalf of the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Appreciate all of you and your willingness to join us today and look forward to receiving your testimony. And to that end, Dr. Clancy, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairwoman Brownlee, Ranking Member Dunn, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. As you noted, I'm accompanied by Drs. Romani and Muralidhar. As Deputy Undersecretary for Health for Discovery, Education, and Affiliate Networks, I'm pleased to be here to share our vision and deliverables in the field of precision medicine. My office was created precisely because Secretary Wilkie and Dr. Stone recognized that aligning and elevating our academic missions is absolutely vital to making sure that all veterans, irrespective of background, get cutting-edge care. And there are studies to support that in the academic arena. So we're very excited about that. And we're committed to ensuring that veterans are among the first to benefit from cutting-edge care. And I am sure that you know that Dr. Secretary Wilkie, as a result of his prior position at the Department of Defense, is probably more attuned to the growing diversity of the veteran population now and in the future than most would be, and is usually the first to come out with statistics like the ones that you cited. Since its inception, VA research has measured its success based upon real-world impact. The pacemaker and liver transplantation are well-known examples of early VA research advances that transformed healthcare. Fewer people know that the Gleason grading system, which is used worldwide to predict the prognosis of a man with prostate cancer, was created by Dr. Donald Gleason, a VA pathologist. More recently, VA conducted the foundational trial that established active surveillance as a safe long-term alternative to prostatectomy in men with low-risk prostate cancer. By continuing to advance the precision of medical care, we can go beyond, way beyond, general predictions like low, medium, and high-risk prostate cancer to specific predictions that will guide an individual veteran's care. One of the ways we're making this vision a reality for veterans is through our partnership with the Prostate Cancer Foundation. Our first milestone is to ensure that men with metastatic prostate cancer receive DNA sequencing, and already this effort has identified men who, based on their genetic variations, are benefiting from precision therapies. New precision medicine treatments are first made available through clinical trials, and in February of 2018, we began the Access to Clinical Trials, or ACT, for Veterans initiative in collaboration with the National Association of Veterans Research and Education Foundations. Through this effort, we've set a goal to start up industry-sponsored clinical trials 100 days faster than our current average by the end of fiscal year 2021. In October of last year, the Office of Research and Development welcomed a new director of the Office of Research Protections, Policy, and Education. She and her team immediately began working towards that goal in a fairly relentless fashion, including opening the door to relying on commercial institutional review boards, which are used by many industry-sponsored clinical trials. Precision medicine treatments are grounded in the discovery of the relationship between genetic variations and disease. One of VA's major investments, of course, is the Million Veteran Program that you referenced. And today, 8 years after it began, it is the largest mega biobank in the world. Over 750,000 veterans from all 50 states, Guam and Puerto Rico, have enrolled, and we also have their clinical electronic data, which makes it literally a unique resource in the world. Because of the richness of the data, VA researchers have begun to shed light on the genetics of a range of conditions that impact veterans' health, including alcohol use disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. It's a source of hope to veterans living with the invisible wounds of war, and it is our job to turn that hope into treatments. For example, on one end of the spectrum, we're partnering with the Department of Defense to follow thousands of veterans with mild traumatic brain injury experienced in combat. Each of these participants undergoes intensive biosampling and imaging, enabling us to identify biomarkers associated with brain injury and more comorbidities like PTSD. On the clinical end of the spectrum, we now have a study in progress, the Prime Care study, a trial which is determining whether matching veterans with depression to medications based on their genetic variation leads to improved outcomes. These studies exist because our veteran partners are willing to continue to serve our nation through participation in research, and an essential step to realize our promise to participants to advance precision medicine is to establish a modern computational infrastructure that can scale to support hundreds of analyses occurring in parallel. To that end, we're working with the University of Chicago and the Open Commons Consortium to pilot a VA data commons where de-identified data from MVP and electronic health record data will be broadly available to approved VA and non-VA researchers. Our goal is to have the infrastructure and services to support a minimum of 100 parallel projects in the VA data commons by the end of fiscal year 2021. On behalf of ORD, the many VA researchers and the veterans who participate in VA research, I thank you for your attention. My colleagues and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Clancy. Dr. Haas, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Brownlee, Ranking Member Dunn, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I am Dr. Magali Haas, CEO and President of Cohen Veterans Bioscience. I am the wife of a veteran, and I'm representing the Coalition to Heal Invisible Wounds. It is an honor to testify before the subcommittee on the topic of advancing precision therapies for veterans alongside Dr. Clancy and my fellow coalition member, Matt Koontz. Cohen Veterans Bioscience is a national nonpartisan 501c3 public charity that operates as a translational research organization. We are dedicated to fast-tracking the development of diagnostic tests and personalized therapeutics for the millions of veterans and civilians who suffer the devastating effects of trauma-related and other brain disorders. We partner closely with the Department of Defense, the VA, the NIH, FDA, and other agencies, as well as academia, foundations, and industry partners to advance this mission. We share this mission because today more military service members are dying after they come home by suicide than on the battlefield, and many more are suffering the chronic effects of post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury. For these invisible wounds, we have inadequate treatment options for far too many. In an effort to close this gap, we are partnering with the Department of Defense to fund and operate an ambitious program to conduct a multi-center adaptive platform trial to test multiple therapies in parallel under a design approach that is cutting edge. The VA is a critical partner in this effort, and we need VA research sites to participate in the program starting this fall. I am testifying today on behalf of the Coalition to Heal Invisible Wounds, which advocates for policy reforms to widen and expedite the pipeline for new therapies and diagnostics for PTSD and TBI and suicide prevention. The Coalition's focus since its founding in 2017 has been to empower the Veterans Health Administration, the largest integrated healthcare system in the United States, and one that is home to an established scientific enterprise that conducts more than $1 billion of research each year, to be positioned as a leading clinical research partner. We ask today that the subcommittee bolster the VA's efforts to overhaul its clinical trial startup practices. According to industry data, VA sites take an average of 265 days to activate a site versus 141 days for non-VA sites. Because of these lengthy delays, many clinical research sponsors do not even attempt to bring clinical research to the VA and have not done so for decades. Sponsors that do engage face a non-streamlined decisions and protocol review process and significant wait times for site initiations that can cost overruns. When sponsors are unable or unwilling to conduct studies at VA sites, it means that veterans lack access to the frontier of medicine for many disease conditions, particularly oncological research. For many individuals with cancer, investigational therapies are the only last best hope for a patient. What happens when a cancer study does not open in a VA facility? A veteran suffering from that form of cancer is denied this path and is more likely to die sooner. And if we can't launch the PTSD adaptive platform trial in a timely fashion within VA sites this year, we stand to fail in establishing scientific evidence that supports the proper utilization of existing and new therapeutics for these conditions. Without better treatments for PTSD and TBI, we cannot effectively combat the suicide and opioid epidemics. We believe that with targeted reforms, the VA can become 100 days faster on average at clinical trial startup by 2021. The Coalition calls this the 100 Days Faster Initiative. For us, faster is shorthand for efficiency, improved quality, performance metrics, and adoption of cutting-edge technologies and best-in-class solutions. 100 days matter. These reforms will require system-wide engagement and implementation and will extend throughout numerous functions within the VA. It is therefore imperative that Congress provide the VA statutory guidance to achieve the 100 Days Faster objective to ensure prioritization around this focus. We recommend that guidance focus on 4 reforms, some of which are partially underway at the VA already. Allow the use of commercial institutional review boards, or IRBs, in sponsored clinical research. Create and make permanent research-specific capacities within both the Office of Information Technology and the Office of Privacy and Records Management, and refocus the role of Research and Development Committee. In conclusion, the Coalition thanks the subcommittees for its work to strengthen the VA's capacity to support the development of precision medicine. Veterans have earned the right to world-class health care, and we strongly believe that the VA has the potential to be a world-class research partner enabling better health care for service members and veterans. Thank you.
Chairwoman Brownlee, Ranking Member Dunn, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, on behalf of NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, I would like to extend our gratitude for the opportunity to share with you our views and recommendations regarding Beyond the Million Veterans Program, Barriers to Precision Medicine. The entire NAMI community applauds the committee's dedication in addressing the critical issues around veterans' brain health. NAMI is the nation's largest grassroots mental health organization dedicated to building better lives for millions of Americans affected by mental illness. NAMI advocates for access to services, treatment, support, and research, and is steadfast in its commitment to raising awareness and building a community of hope for all of those in need. To start out with the scientific justification, the VA serves over 1 million veterans in a treatment system based upon mental health diagnostic categorization that the former director of the National Institute of Mental Health has deemed not to be predictive of treatment response. And this is not the VA's fault. This is the state of the science. But it is incumbent on Congress and the VA to push the state of this science forward to take better care of America's heroes. From the ground, how it looks is like my stepbrother, Specialist Chris Dana. We lost him to PTSD after serving in Iraq, and I'll tell you flat out, the Montana National Guard, who he served with, and our family did not understand the extent of his injury until after we lost him. And for another example, my friend Commander John Scott Hannon, 23 years in the Navy SEALs, and then retired to come back home to Montana to live one gulch over from me in the woods. And he battled with a number of brain conditions and got treatment for years. But what lost him was the final diagnosis, was the bipolar disorder. And I sat down with his sister a few months after his death, and she said, if we had just known about the bipolar disorder earlier, he worked on everything else, but we didn't even know this was the case. And that is what I see day in, day out. Or like my friend, Mike Franklin, he was a fellow West Pointer, an Army infantryman, a Navy chaplain, and then a college counselor. And just as interesting as that goofy resume would suggest, but he suffered from treatment-resistant depression, which affects about 30% of the people that have depression, and none of the standardized treatments would work for him. And the treatments would just fail and fail, and my last conversation with him was, Mike, please keep trying. We'll find some research, we'll find something, but he could not keep going. And that is the reality on the ground while we wait for precision medicine to catch up. There has been scientific progress in the past 10 years, as discussed, and especially the emergence of transdiagnostic biomarkers for brain health conditions. For me, that's kind of changed the paradigm for how we think about this. It shows that the traditional diagnostic categories aren't going to line up exactly with the biosignatures. We should not expect them to. And there's some really good examples of precision mental health care happening in research around the country. Dr. Amit Etkin's work at the Palo Alto VA on treatment-resistant PTSD was an amazing study. Dr. Madhukar Trivedi and his work at the University of Texas Southwestern on finding biosignatures to better treat depression is real steps forward. Some of the recommendations that we have, NAMI Montana and NAMI National were real good partners in helping write the Precision Mental Health Initiative in the Commander John Scott Hannon Act, and that's on the Senate side, and we really like that model for moving forward. On a local level, we'd like to ensure that the Veterans Equitable Resource Allocation Model supports precision mental health initiatives. If local VA administrators are not incentivized to do this, this will fail. So ensuring that Vera reflects that reality. And on a really simplistic note, using machine learning to take some of the pain of the article drafting process off of VA researchers. I've toured around the country with the Cover Commission looking at VA researchers and clinicians, and some of them cannot publish because they don't have time, and they have the data that we paid for, that we're ready for, and they can't publish because it takes too much time, and using machine learning to help ease some of that. And in conclusion, I just want to say this means so much to me personally. When we lost my stepbrother, Chris, there was just no hope, and to see committees like this looking to improve the brain health treatment system for our veterans is incredibly important. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Koontz, and this committee offers its condolences to you for the loss of your stepbrother, Chris. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, ma'am.
I now recognize myself for 5 minutes, and the first question I had was really to Dr. Haas, and in my opening comments, we talked a little bit about your summation that there could be lots of different variations of post-traumatic stress. So where are we in that research? I mean, if there are possibly 100 versions of these, is there, can you just kind of describe where we are? Is this a hypothesis? Is this a science base that you know this already, or you believe through more research we can determine whether this is true or not?
So we believe that there are multiple forms of or underlying mechanisms that can lead to a presentation that we call PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And the science is essentially still in its nascency on some fronts. If we're looking at this in terms of what do we understand about the molecular basis and circuit basis of disease, that science is still in discovery form. We have the earliest findings now for genetics that are emerging out of both the Million Veterans Project and also from the Psychiatric Genetics Consortium. The first data were just published last year on this, showing genome-wide significant findings that there is a genetic underpinning to PTSD. And so with different genes, we can expect them. There are different pathways and therefore different mechanisms that different people have vulnerability to PTSD in the wake of trauma. That's the tip of the iceberg. Matt Koontz mentioned the data from Palo Alto, Dr. Edkins' work. He's been working on a biomarker that's identifying a subset of patients that have a different underlying circuit. And they all have the same diagnosis of PTSD. They look the same in terms of symptoms, but you can differentiate them based on their circuit using resting state fMRI. So that's suggesting to us, and that work needs to be validated, that there are subsets with subtypes within PTSD. That's the type of emerging evidence that suggests that we're going to see more. But if you look across other brain disorders and diseases, we see this as a systematic principle of science and healthcare and disease. We're seeing that in cancer already. We no longer just talk about lung cancer, we talk about lung cancer subtypes. We do the same in cardiovascular disease. We do this in every other field of biology except in brain disorders.
So when you talk about identifying this circuit, does that mean that the man or woman, when they sign up to serve, that circuit exists before they've actually served our country?
So at this time, we don't know whether this is a pre-existing circuit or one that that becomes emergent in the course of exposures. Also, even with your genetics, it's vulnerability, it's a probability, but it doesn't mean that you're going to get a given condition.
Thank you. Dr. Clancy, I wanted to ask you, as chair of the Women's Veterans Task Force, when I read through your testimony and the others, the first thing that came to mind was the inclusion of women and minorities into clinical trials, but even in terms of broadening the database that we have currently. And so I guess my question is twofold. One, how do we sort of incentivize inclusion of clinical trials for women and minorities? And then it certainly, in terms of women veterans, infertility is a big issue. And many women are often diagnosed with an unexplained infertility, and that seems to be a higher diagnosis rate than for men. I was just in a hearing this morning where I was told that ALS, which is seems to be more prominent in the veteran community than the civilian community. I was told that we don't know why that is true. So I guess my question is inclusion, infertility, and are we looking at things like ALS? And I have no more time left, but I'll give you a few minutes.
So some of this we'd like to take for the record to give you a complete accounting of what's known. As you know, all federally funded research has to be inclusive of women and minorities. I believe that the diversity of the veteran population is precisely why the Prostate Cancer Foundation came to us for the collaboration that we're undertaking now, which has been underway for a couple of years. And it's hard for me to convey the energy and excitement around this right up to Dr. Stone and the Secretary, which I think is phenomenal. I would need to learn a little bit more, but we'd be happy to get you information about infertility. ALS, in my mind, represents a very large question mark. I do know that it is a presumption for some veterans as a condition of military exposure, but we still have a lot to learn because that disease itself, I can tell you that I personally have a relative who has ALS, a woman, who she has not quite been in the same territory as Stephen Hawking, but has had a pattern of disease which is very, very different. And I think that underscores all of the points that Dr. Haas is making, that understanding, and that Matt made as well, about shifting how precision medicine and understanding more about genetic variation is going to help us redefine how we think about diagnoses and disease, that we'll probably look back on this time in the not-too-distant future as kind of, the Ice Age or something, because all of our diagnoses, particularly in mental health, are based, and much of neurological diseases are based on careful categorization of disease, of symptoms and signs, but we didn't have the imaging and biomarkers that we needed.
Thank you, Dr. Clancy. Dr. Dunn.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your comments on that. I think you're right, too. Dr. Clancy, I'm going to sort of do a lot of rapid-fire questions here if I can, because I have so many. Have we started doing the sequencing on all these biobank?
Yes, we have started that sequencing.
Where is that being done?
I'm going to turn to Suma for specifics here.
Is it a contracted?
I couldn't hear.
Sorry. Contracted vendor, Personalis, out in California.
All right. What's the status of the VA Department of Energy partnership on the computing? This is the quantum computing. We were going to start comparing the data and the records to the sequencing.
So we've just completed the IRB approvals for the 3 projects. Our first 3 projects are...
This is the national single IRB?
Yes, it is through the
So it's
central
done.
IRB. The projects have completed central IRB approval.
Good.
And the computing environment is ready in the Department of Energy. And the first three projects are focused on assessing suicide risk, acute suicide risk, which is of the greatest relevance for us. The second is on prostate cancer, to distinguish between lethal and non-lethal.
We got a lot of that?
Yes, and then the third one is on the total cardiovascular disease burden.
Outstanding. Good. We look forward to it. When are there interim updates on this, or are we just sort of waiting for the research papers?
We are just waiting to get the work started.
Okay. So, Dr. Clancy, why does the Office of Research and Development have to enter into a partnership with the VA National Clinical Oncology Program, given they're both VA entities? I thought the partnership existed ipso facto.
So this is interesting because it gets to your earlier point in your opening statement about getting to rapid translation and impact on veterans' lives. Traditionally, and I mean this is true everywhere, you know, first we do the research and then we make the publications, then the word gets out and it's incorporated into textbooks, and in my former life, we documented that time lag is about 17 years. That was not VA specific, but in general, scientifically.
I agree.
The important part about this collaboration with the Prostate Cancer Foundation is that we're really pushing the boundaries of that history, right? So we've got researchers working alongside.
So let me interrupt you just because in the interest of time. I'm very, very familiar with the Prostate Cancer Foundation. I've been working with them for years. Great translational work, much, much faster, very, very accelerated. Couldn't agree with you more. Let's do more on that line. Dr. Haas and perhaps Mr. Koontz as well, what do you think is the single greatest barrier to VA researchers? What's the biggest barrier they're facing, researchers in the VA?
Having time carved out for their research is the.
So are clinical duties interfering with research?
Yes. Other duties in general. Yes, they've reported that repeatedly to us, that they don't have the ability to
Mr. Koontz, you
focus.
agree with that?
Yeah, yes, sir, and that was why I highlighted the veterans' equitable resource allocations. So with those clinician researchers are on the ground.
I'm concerned. I will tell you, it's not intuitive to me that following this equitable resource distribution across the divisions is going to speed up the research or make more time available to the researchers. Well, we'll consider that, but not in the next minute and a half. Dr. Clancy, can you quantify the impact that your research program has on your department's ability to recruit and retain clinician researchers?
It is phenomenal. I'll tell you why, because frankly, a young physician emerging from training today, from residency, surgery, whatever, if they want a terrific career in research, their best shot is to come to VA. And I think many of them know that because we value and put a very high premium on physicians who both see patients and actually do research. So it is a tremendous recruiting tool for us. I will say that you've probably just highlighted some issues about the tension between clinical productivity and appropriate documentation.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
Yes, as well as carving out time for research, but we're happy to take that and get back with you.
So a hot button issue is one we hear about frequently is service dogs for veterans with PTSD. Can you give us an update on that study and when we're going to hear some recommendations?
The final data collection is completing this month, and we should have results for you in a year.
We would love that. We
Yes.
would love that. Oh, gosh, I've got so many questions here, Chairwoman, and I'm 7 seconds. Which one's the best one? Based on the Shepherd Therapeutic Statement for the record, over 60 cancers disproportionately affect veterans and service members. 25 of those are rare cancers. What specifically is the VA doing to identify treatment options for cancers that tend to be associated more with veterans? And this sounds like a great use of the Million Veteran Project, frankly.
So I would say that is something that our post-deployment health group is looking at very closely in terms of which truly are disproportionately affecting veterans. And then that's one of the reasons why NCI wanted to partner with us, National Cancer Institute wanted to partner with us, is our ability to find rare cancers because we have such a large database. Now, whether they will be represented in the Million Veteran Program, they may be so rare that they're small in number in MVP, but throughout our system, I agree, we have a great opportunity to shed light on those conditions.
Let me say that I think Chairwoman Brownlee and I would love to help in any way we can, removing regulatory barriers or underscoring the things that you need underscored in order to make progress. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Dunn. Mr. Lamb.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. If I could just pick up right there where Dr. Dunn left off. Is VA starting any sort of database to track the specific types of cancer that patients are diagnosed with and possibly collect tissue samples for further research and integration with the genetic information? Is that sort of collection going on of the tissue samples in particular?
So all veterans with cancer are entered into cancer registries locally, as are patients everywhere. I don't know that we have yet made that connection with MVP, but I actually think it's a terrific idea. There are technical issues related to creating the kind of repository of tissue samples that frankly have been a big challenge for our colleagues at NIH and others as well, but I think it's a fabulous idea.
What are the obstacles? Is there a way you could briefly summarize the obstacles to doing that? Or
I would have to take that for the record. I'm familiar with it only because it really came up when I was running a research agency at HHS, but it has been very tricky to figure out how we would store them and guarantee safety. I'm sure you've read stories where issues with samples that have been lost have been a sort of hot button issue, but do you want to add?
Yes, so one of the challenges is, for example, just in cancer, there are about 400,000 cases a year. So the size of a biobank that you would need to have at the ready and to be able to fund in perpetuity is one of the barriers. So to ensure that you can fund that kind of biobank forever, essentially, is one of the barriers. One of the options.
sorry to interrupt. Does that
Yeah.
type of thing exist anywhere else, or would the VA be the first to do something like that?
I would have to come back to you with that, but I don't believe that such a database with that many cancers exists anywhere.
But you're saying 400,000 per year just within the VA patient population?
Yes, so VA has 8% of the cancers in the country. So when you think about that, that is just an enormous number. So that's one of the challenges, and that's only talking about cancers and not other conditions, for instance, invisible wounds of war. So the alternative that I think we should explore is the fact that many of these individuals do have pathology samples already extant in the VA in various repositories across the country. So while they wouldn't be specifically collected for research, we could have essentially a virtual pathology stores, and that is the direction that we are looking for. In addition to capturing some of those images, like slide images and the radiological images to pair with, for instance, MVP data.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's we're looking sort of to the future with a whole generation of veterans now exposed to burn pits, especially. That's kind of what's motivating my question here. So
Yes.
we'll stay in touch with you about that.
Thank you.
Dr. Clancy, also just wanted to say, very happy to hear about the research at the Philadelphia Medical Center on opioids and genetic predictors there. So if there's anything we can ever do to help accelerate that program, or if you have results to share at any point, please let us know.
Absolutely.
Last thing I just wanted to ask is, I see there being an IT side to this whole thing as well. Obviously, we're in the process now of building this new health record system for the VA. When and if the science advances enough from the Million Veterans Program or otherwise, I could see a future in which clinicians are using their electronic health record system to look at maybe genetic information about the patient who's in front of them and whether they would reject certain drugs or not, to help them speed through that appointment. Is that something that's being talked about at your level with Cerner to make sure there's room for that in the system that's being built? Do you know?
So we're actively working with Cerner to make sure that the system will be able to accommodate our research needs. I think it's safe to say that they probably don't have a customer with the extent and depth of the research that we support. At least on paper and in person, they're excited about it, but we do have people who are getting way down into the technical weeds to make sure that that happens. Some piece of that we're excited about, although we have not found the perfect solution yet, nor has anyone else, is the notion of trial matching, so that, today, Any patient's entry into a clinical trial depends on a light bulb going on over a doctor's head, and then needing to go look things up. If you think about how Amazon and other companies work, we could be pushing that information to the encounter to at least lift some of the burden, and frankly, to make the information, how would I say, more patient-friendly. But that is exactly the kind of thing that we need to be doing, and, you know, an electronic record that supports our needs has to have those needs as well.
Okay, well, I'm sure you know we have the separate subcommittee on IT and
Yes.
are frequently in dialogue with all the players. So if you run into any roadblocks there, or there's a way we can help the conversation with Cerner or otherwise, please let us know.
Thank you.
you, Madam Chairwoman. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb, and I now recognize Ms. Radewagen for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Haas, why does it take VA sites so much longer to activate a clinical trial than non-VA sites? And what are the barriers to using commercial IRBs?
It takes longer because the current system doesn't allow the utilization of commercial IRBs, among other factors. So when a sponsor goes to the VA to conduct a trial, they have to go through multiple reviews, and the current centralized process is significantly slower than the commercial IRB process is. Why, the second question was why the central IRB?
What are the barriers to using commercial IRBs?
As far as I understand, both Drs. Clancy and Dr. Ramoni are committed to utilizing a central IRB, a commercial central IRB process, but they continue to run into major challenges. And at a minimum, we believe that Secretary Wilkie should facilitate the successful and timely implementation of this reform. It is actionable, and the enactment of legislation may also be necessary, but there are no overt reasons why it cannot be implemented.
And Dr. Clancy, do you agree with that assessment? And do you support CHIW's 100 Days Faster initiative? Why?
Absolutely, and not only that, I'm pleased to say that we've got work in progress to make that happen. The finalizing of the new common rule for research that affects all participants in research and so forth, which has to be in place this fall, next fall, or early 2020? Early calendar year 2020, for a system our size is one big heavy lift. So the leader whom Dr. Ramoni recruited hit the ground running like I can't even describe, and I think we will get that done. When I worked at HHS, we used a commercial IRB in a different manifestation, but nonetheless had very good luck with it, and there's no reason we can't do this here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ms. Radewagen. Mr. Barr, I recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. My grandfather served on a destroyer in the Navy in World War II, and he was diagnosed with cancer as a young veteran, and he received treatment and was in remission, and then at age 59, he was diagnosed with multiple myeloma and passed. This was in 1977 when I was a young child. And of course, we've had a lot of advances in diagnosis of cancer and treatment of cancer, and obviously service members in eras since World War II have, you know, better treatment outcomes and hopefully better diagnostics. But we think that my grandfather was exposed to radiation on that destroyer. We don't know for sure, but we think that was probably what caused his cancer. In Vietnam, obviously, Agent Orange is something that we think is a cause, and then now in the post-9/11 generation burn pits, but radiation throughout the eras. My question to you all is, what advances in precision medicine are helping with diagnosis, and how is the VA doing in terms of, in conjunction with DOD, how are they doing in terms of, you know, identifying risk factors for cancers with service members, and how is the VA trying to detect these cancers earlier because of service members' exposures to these various risks? And I'll start with Dr. Clancy.
Sure, and I'll start off and then turn to Dr. Ramoni. So at baseline, as a foundational element, of course, veterans receive the current state of the science recommended screening tests for cancers, which sounds fairly basic, but it's surprising because not all Americans do for one reason or another. So that's colorectal cancer screening, breast cancer, and lung cancer, and so forth, all of which is good stuff. Linking that back to exposures as a result of service is trickier for sure. A lot of our ability to do that is obviously dependent on the precision of the records of where people served. Now, depending on their job classification, those records may be more available or not. But that's why it's very important that we have a research collaboration as part of our Health Executive Committee, where VA and DoD come together on a regular basis to explore those very issues. For some conflicts, the first Gulf War is a good example. There's very, very little information about where people served because of the short-term nature of the deployment, and we just don't have very good information. For other issues, it's a matter of our records available and so forth. But obviously, as you pointed out, with burn pit exposure, people are very, very worried about that, which is why we're trying to beef up the registry and encourage people to come in for exams and so forth. Do you want to add?
Dr. Ramoni?
Surely. So first of all, I would agree with Dr. Clancy that getting accurate records of exposures is key to our ability to understand the impacts of those exposures. There are well-known associations with Agent Orange and cancer, and prostate cancer have more severe cancer if you're exposed to Agent Orange. Camp Lejeune exposures, but for the multiplicity of things people were exposed to in their deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, we need to understand much more, and we are committing to, we're in the process of putting together 2021 priorities, and we are committing to better understand the effects of military exposures. And in particular, there's a dearth of information on the clinical side. So we have a lot of epidemiologic research, we have basic science research, but there's an enormous gap for the clinical research that will lead to translation much more quickly.
Thank you. And in my remaining time, of course, with precision medicine, there's a tremendous opportunity. And what we're told is that in oncology in particular, there's potential with the use of molecular diagnostics at the time of diagnosis to help establish genetic characteristics of cancer. Is the VA performing this type of molecular testing for cancer patients at the moment of diagnosis? Yes. And what is the promise of that? Explain that to us.
So it's unknown what the promise is right at this moment. There are some diagnostics that are well recognized. For example, there are certain types of lung tumor variants that have turned out to be very important, and we're working actively with several organizations that are facilitating access to industry funding for additional research in this area, which is terrific. At the moment, for lung cancer, those appear to be a small minority of patients, although it's amazing to meet people who tell you they were diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer 7, 8 years ago, and here they are just doing fine now, which still blows my mind. For other areas, we're still in a much more exploratory phase, so I'm thinking about relatives who have shared their results of testing with me. When I say to them, gosh, this is like a lot of markers and tests, and did you ask what they're for? And they all said, well, yes, but they're not sure yet, but they're testing just in case. And we haven't quite advanced to that level yet, but the number of tests that are actually approved and recommended in terms of the evidence that we've got that it makes a difference is still a fairly short list. We do have a partnership with the Sanford Health System, actually looking at a cancer survivorship cohort, which may have helped the situation you described with your grandfather, but that was just launched about a year ago. So we'll have more to report on that as it progresses.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Barr. And Dr. Dunn, do you have some?
I confess I do.
Good.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman Brown.
Absolutely.
one of the things we talk about translation and speeding up the translation from beds to a bedside, and I think that's a lot of that is about system, how we work as clinicians with researchers. And you made a point earlier that it used to be 10 to 15 years, you know, somebody do work away in a lab, dusty old lab, you know, find some facts out, write a paper, add a chapter to our textbook, and then some young, brilliant scientist comes along, reads it, and applies it to patients. Now it's much quicker. We actually, you know, we bring a sick patient to the scientist and say, what do you know? What do you have? And then I think that the Million Veteran Project is an ideal resource for that kind of translational research that quickly gets in there and really hits the literature very quickly. And I think, by the way, you've partnered well with PCF on that. And there's a similar group, by the way, that does breast cancer research in the same way, translational very fast. And that's another group that I think you could find very easily. So one thing that I was reading in your memo about the 3 principal lines of science that we were talking about, researching with the 31 alpha, beta, and gamma research projects, then the 3 exemplar projects with the DOE, which you mentioned earlier, and the MVP project itself. How are we doing on those 3, generally on those 3 lines of research? And I'm not sure who to ask that question to.
Sure. So from the 31 alpha, beta, and gamma projects, we have about 5 or 6 projects that are pretty mature and already yielding results. And for example, there was one project on the genetics of cholesterol, and we found
Genetics of what?
cholesterol, lipids, high cholesterol. And
I guess I need to read that paper.
yes, it's some very interesting findings. First of all, that they have discovered some new genetic variants in the subgroup of African Americans, and Hispanics. So it's different from what's seen in the Caucasian population.
So have you published that paper?
Yes, it came out in Nature Genetics last November. We can send you a link.
I would love that.
Yes,
Thank
we
you.
will.
Thank you.
And they also found, what they found very interesting in that is they found genetic variations in 3 genes, which could be potential therapeutic targets. And then there are drugs out there already in the market that could be applied to these. And so we are now investigating how we can translate that discovery pretty quickly into the clinic. And another example, I think, are from the MVP, we are also piloting trying to return results for men with metastatic prostate cancer, where knowing specific variants in their DNA repair genes, for example, can then direct them to a particular treatment that would work better with them. And so that
I'm familiar with that. That's great.
Yes, that one, and also in familial hypercholesteremia, FH, an inherited form of high cholesterol, where you can begin intensive treatment earlier on if you knew that you had the genes for that. So we're also piloting that with MVP. So there are 2 projects that can see immediate translation from MVP. The 3 exemplar projects with DOE that I mentioned with the Department of Energy are just about to begin. So it's going to be, we are going to have milestones within the first year. So within a year, we hope to report back to you some of the findings on the predictive algorithms for suicide risk or prostate cancer.
That'd be exciting. It's great to see that kind of progress happening, in short time frames, relatively speaking. What mechanisms do we have to inform the patients, the VA, the veterans in the VA health system, that we have some of these research projects available, that maybe they want to participate in the research, or maybe they just want to benefit from the very cutting edge work that you're doing? Is there an information portal? So, hey, the VA is studying this. We have expertise, maybe in the VA in Miami in this, and the VA in LA in a different subject.
So what I'm less clear about, but very hot on finding out, so I'll be meeting with all of our chiefs of staff, I guess, second week in July, just to ask that very question, is how much local facilities tout what they are doing, because there's nothing like home team pride, right? Right here at the Philadelphia or whatever VA, we are doing something really amazing. I happened to meet a couple of researchers from the amazing Philadelphia VA last week at our research day here over in the Rayburn building. We certainly, VSO conventions are a very big place for us to share a lot of these findings, and also, by the way, to enroll people in MVP. But I think that we could exploit other opportunities as well. We also have a blog that goes out to a lot of veterans, although I am told since we don't make the printed copy anymore, we may not be reaching everyone. That's a different topic. But in any case, I think there's other venues that we could explore for that, because I do think it's a point of pride.
Yeah, getting the word out is almost as important as actually, making the great discovery. And I'll make one request of you, and then I'll yield back. And the request is, next time you have a research day here on the Hill, let me know. All right. I'd love to come.
Absolutely. You can count on it.
Thanks so very much. I'll yield back.
Don't just let Dr. Dunn know exclusively, but, yeah, I'm going to yield myself a little bit more time too. And so I want to know exactly how we can tear down the barriers and what Congress barriers are to enhancing, hastening the research that the VA is doing. So I know we've talked about the commercial review boards, moving to that. I honestly don't understand why the VA can't just mimic a commercial review board, why we have to make it so complicated that, it goes back to this idea of, every head of a medical center has, full decision-making power and authority over so many programs that we're trying to kind of standardize, across the board. But, so that's one. If that's what we have to do, let's do it. And I think there were probably some mention of some other important, I think Dr. Haas, you talked about some targeted reforms that are needed. And I'm not sure I have that in my head, but if we're only talking about changing statutory guidance, that's one thing, but if we need legislation, that's another thing. And certainly, I think I do, and I think the committee does, has a big interest in if we can move forward legislation to tear down some of these barriers. It doesn't seem to be there are costs really associated with that. If we can do that, I think we need to start rolling up our sleeves and getting that work done. So, Dr. Clancy, I'm just looking to you as our resource so that we can begin that work.
So thank you for that, and I cannot overstate how much your interest in having this hearing, and frankly, just the level of questions and the depth of interest will be for our efforts, for sure. I think we will just move ahead with commercial IRBs. I see one, or commercial IRB. I see one little wrinkle, but I think that is easy. It feels easy now to more or less adjudicate, which is what is the relationship between commercial IRB and our internal Office of Oversight and Review. But if that is an issue, I will bring that back to you. I'm just not sure that I'm seeing that need legislative guidance and so forth. But we will certainly bring back the intensity of interest here, which means more to me than I can tell you.
Well, and I think, I don't know where, I believe I know where you stand on this, but I think we're also interested in opening up more opportunities with private industry and the research that they're doing that, I think together collectively we can make more progress and perhaps make faster.
Well, that's a very, very important signal for us, and we will certainly make the most of it.
But in terms of what we need to do, to include that particular area too, I think is really important. And I wanted to go back to Mr. Lamb's questioning with the electronic health record. So it seems to me in reading the testimony that one of the things needed is the Department of Energy's computer structure, whatever, to manage the data that we have so far. I'm not a computer scientist, nor am I a doctor, nor am I a researcher, so forgive me for not having the right terminology. But if that's the case, and if we're using the Department of Energy to help to manipulate that data, if the electronic health record is going to be, sort of finalized in the next 7, 8, 9 years it's going to be to finalize it. I guess the question that I'm trying to ask without being a technical expert here is, if the VA were to change or to do their own in-house computer system to manage this data, or they're going to continue to use the Department of Energy, or the Department of Energy changes their process, does that have to be compatible and interactive with an electronic health record to get to where we want to go?
Well, certainly for speeding up ease of identifying relevant patients, being interactive is absolutely necessary. And I would say it's also necessary to make sure that we can translate rapidly. I will say that the computational needs for research writ large are pretty immense, so even NIH is exploring lots of different venues, from investing in their own, the Cancer Institute has had like a very robust investment in bioinformatics for quite a few years, but they're working with Google too, and we're having conversations with Google and a number of other companies, and frankly, they're delighted to have them because they don't have access to specific patient data. Obviously, that needs to be negotiated to make sure all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted and so forth, and privacy is protected. But nonetheless, I think there's just immense opportunity.
It just, the concern I have is if there are different entities that you are working with, and we ultimately want that to be compatible with our health records, if that's changing constantly, the health record to be interoperable between DOD and VA right now is complicated enough. That really adds, at least it seems to me, another very complicated level that will take some level of sophistication to make all that happen. Now, I'm just expressing that concern.
I think Dr. Ramone had something to add.
Yeah.
So, we've all highlighted how rich VA data are, and currently those data are held in a VISTA system. One of the key factors in ensuring that we continue to derive value from that data for our veterans is that historical data be maintained, and that it not simply be mapped to the new system, because you lose information when you kind of map it to a new system. So for research to continue, it's important that we maintain those historical data well before, for people even who have passed on. It's still important that we have that information. So it may exceed the clinical needs for that information at this point, but we still need it for research.
Very good, very good. And then I guess the last question that I had is just, just to help me understand how this fits into the larger research arena is, how does the VA's research budget compare to the National Institute of Health, Food and Drug Administration, other governmental agencies? Do you have any idea?
Well, yes, so our budget for this current year is just under $800 million. I would guess that that's comparable to almost twice that amount in NIH dollars, because we pay people's salaries from different lines. In fact, I used to review grants at VA before I came to VA, and I was always surprised by the budget numbers because they didn't quite make sense to me, in part because I was used to looking at budgets that paid for every single minute of everyone's time. So that is... that would put us at $1.5 to $2 billion in equivalent buying power, I believe, which would put us in the scope of some of their larger institutes. I'd guess the Cancer Institute is in the ballpark of $5 to $7 billion. The entire National Institutes of Health, which is immense, is somewhere in the $30 billion.
But the research component is?
Oh, they're all research.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, I think that's, for me, I think I don't have any further questions, Mr. Dunn, do you have any closing remarks you'd like to make before we?
Yes, so I thank the panel for their patience. I know that we dinged you on your schedule today. We dinged ourselves, so we know we dinged you too. But it's our fault, and I appreciate your patience and your willingness to come and educate us. And I would like you to think that this actually is not a waste of your time, because we need the information in order to make good decisions. And so thank you for your efforts on our behalf and behalf of your patients.
Well, thank you for your interest. This has really been
Yeah,
phenomenal.
well, and I appreciate all of you being here. Mr. Koontz, we didn't ask you a question, but your testimony was invaluable, so thank you very, very much for being here. And Dr. Clancy, I'm very serious about following up with how we can break these barriers down to be able to do what we need to do within this BA, but to open up this sort of treasure chest that we have to the private industry, so that we can really help and move towards some of these successes. Clearly, suicide and post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury. We know that all of these things lead ultimately to suicide. Cancer, obviously, for our veterans, these are areas that our veteran community needs very, very desperately. And if we could truly be the leaders in all of this, I think it would be quite extraordinary. So I really commend all of you for the work that you're doing, and this is really a high point in what the VA does, and so I thank all of you and your expertise. And with that, all members will have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material, and without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you.